Hello, once again, this is Jennifer McGuire. I'm so glad you're here. Now, today's cards were such fun to make because they were all inspired by my friend Gina from Gina K Designs. Now, Gina is known for her excellent live videos, her wonderful products, and her great cards. My favorite cards of Gina's are those where she does masking. So today I am sharing some masking tips for you. Now these aren't masking images, but rather like masked backgrounds to create really cool cards, many of which can be one layer cards. So I have a bunch of cards for you using Gina's products and using a variety of little tips I've learned from her along the way. So each card shares a type of masking technique. Some are simple, some are a little more advanced, but I'm hoping there's something for everyone. Let's get started with this card here. Now for this one, I'm using the Gina K Designs Christmas Begins with Christ stamp set. Now this one is right up my alley. I really like these images. Gina is known for doing wonderful silhouette images, and it's perfect for masking techniques. And by the way, if you're looking for Hanukkah images, she has incredible Hanukkah stamp sets and stencils and more. I'll have those linked in my description below. Many of those images would work great for these techniques also. On this first card, I will also use the older Gina K Master Layouts 11 die set. If you're not familiar with Gina K's Master Layout sets, she has many of them, and they have basic dies that can be used in many different ways with other products you have, and I highly recommend them. This Master Layouts 11 happens to be one of my favorites because it has the postage style dies included in it. I've used this one several times in videos. Next, I have a piece of Gina K Masking Magic, and I'm cutting it to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Now, Gina K Masking Magic is by far my favorite masking paper. I highly recommend it. I'm using the full sheets here. I also have my Gina K Intracut die cut machine out and the new magnetic platform. So you can see that magnetic platform holds the dies in place. Now the Intracut is back in stock, so I can start using it in videos again. The nice thing about this machine is it has dials on the side. So no matter what you're doing, you use the same plates and platform. You just change the dials on the side. I have a video all about this and the wonderful things you can do with it. I'll link to that up here on the top right and at the end of this video. All right, so I'm just running through that masking magic sheet along with this kind of window looking die that's included in that Master Layouts 11 die set. I'll keep both the inside pieces and the negative piece. I will also use the postage die to cut from white cardstock. This coordinates with that window pane looking die that we just cut from masking paper. By the way, if you like postage dies, Gina K has several options that are fantastic. I will link to the collection below in my YouTube description. I want to place this white mask that looks like a window frame over our postage, but I want the 4 rectangles of the mask to line up with the 4 postage pieces on that die cut. However, it's kind of hard to see through, so here's a little trick that I did. I took 2 of the small white rectangle masks, and I'm placing one on the top left, centered up on that postage, and then one on the bottom right, centered up on that postage. I will then place the window frame mask around those rectangles. So it's really allowing me to center up this mask over the postage so that the 4 rectangle openings are centered on the 4 postage on the die cut behind it. So now I can press that down and remove the rectangles that I placed there temporarily. And thankfully now that I've pressed it down, I can see through that masking magic and I can see it's lined up nicely. So now we just have those 4 rectangles exposed, and it's time to apply some ink on top. I'm using Gina K Design inks today. You've heard me say this many times if you watch my videos, but I think she has a very classic line of inks, and they're very good inks. They soften as they dry and give great results. I'm using 4 of my favorite Gina K colors on this. I started with that orchid color on the left, and I am next applying this lilac color, making sure that I overlap there in the center. By overlapping, you get a better blend. I then will move on to powder blue and then finish off with a bit of tranquil teal. Some of these colors are darker than others, so with those darker colors, I definitely want to come in with a lighter hand. I also like to tap the extra ink off on my glass work surface to prevent harsh lines, but you could also tap that extra ink off in the ink pad lid. So now I'm going back and just doing a bit more blending between the colors. So we have a nice blend going across the 4 rectangles. I will now pick this up and place it into my Misty stamping tool. Inside my Misty stamping tool, I have my waffle flower grip mat, which will hold things in place. Over this, I will stamp the Gina K Designs Beautiful Patterns background stamp. This is one large background stamp. It's a clear stamp, and this is really fun for a lot of techniques. Now here, I'm just lining it up so the 4 patterns are on the 4 different rectangles. Now this background stamp can be used for many more things. There are lots of techniques you could do with this, such as kissing, or you can just use the different patterns on smaller die cuts. But here I'm stamping the top half with Tranquil Teal, and that will get stamped on those top 2 rectangles. This will give a nice tone-on-tone look. I'll then clean my stamp and then ink up the bottom half of this background stamp with medium orchid ink and stamp that on the bottom 2 rectangles. This again will give a tone-on-tone look and just add some interest to our masking. So don't be afraid to stamp over your masking. It's a great way to kind of step up a blended background that you may have created. Now I'm choosing some of the images from the stamp set that I showed you earlier, and I'm lining them up into those openings. I still have my mask on, and I will stamp these with black ink. One of the things I really like about Gina K stamps, once again, is that she has many silhouette designs like this. So they're great when you ink and mask a background, and then you can stamp the silhouette images on top with either black, or you could do heat embossing in white. I really like the look of black against these bold, bright colors. If you wanted to heat emboss these black images or do white heat embossing, you definitely want to make sure you have heat set the ink blending that you've done so that the powder won't want to stick to the background. So once I've stamped my images in black, I can carefully remove that mask and save it for another card. I always save my masks in with the die or stamp packaging. All right, so now I can remove this from my grip mat and look at that fun postage look that we have using masking with a bit of stamping. Now the rest of this card is quite simple. Let me show you the different elements that I used. I used the Gina K Designs Home for the Holidays stamp set. I chose the Merry Christmas sentiment. I stamped that with black on white cardstock and used the coordinating die to cut it out. I glued that right at the center of our postage. I also used the same stamp set that I used on the front of the card on the inside of my card. So here I have my card open and I'm stamping a sentiment there in black, and then I will stamp the star with Tranquil Teal. Now the front of my card and the inside of my card match nicely. And I will stamp on the envelope using the star, so that will pull it all together also. I often leave the inside of my cards blank. I like to write personal messages there. But I know a lot of you like to add something interesting to the inside, so I'll include that on all of my cards today. And here's my beautiful Gina K Designs envelope that will match my card perfectly. So let's look at that completed card. You can see I added the postage to the front of my card and that Merry Christmas sentiment. Now I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card, and between the postage and the note card, I used a piece of Gina K Designs Whisper cardstock. It's a nice, soft, light gray with a little bit of a sand tone to it. I also added some iridescent stars just for a bit of sparkle. So with this card, I demonstrate that you can stamp over your masking, and you can create kind of this window or postage look using smaller images on top of the color. Let's move on to my next card. It uses the same stamp set, but a completely different look. Now this card definitely could be a 1-layer card, and the masking technique that I did in the background could be used with a lot of different images. So I have a piece of white cardstock here that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm kind of planning out where my stamps will be lined up. I find planning out my card like this with the stamps is really helpful, especially when I'm doing a 1-layer card like this. Next up, I have my white piece of cardstock that I'm putting into my Misty stamping tool, and on top of it, I'm placing a Simon Says Stamp placement guide. This will just help me hold those stamps in place as I position them, And I can use the grid lines to make sure the images are centered and straight. I find these placement guides really handy. It also comes with that white piece over on the left. These are really durable, and you'll see me use them a few more times throughout this video. All right, once I have closed the door on my stamping tool to grab those stamps, I'm stamping this with a very light colored ink. This is the Whisper Amalgam ink from Gina K. This is super light. It's great for no line coloring, but what I'm using it for here is so I can see my images, but I don't know at this point what color I want to stamp my images in. So this is just allowing me to see where to put my masking strips. These are Gina K Designs Masking Magic strips. It's the same as the Masking Magic sheets, but the sheets come cut in strips. In a package, I think there's 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/8 inch strips, so you can do a lot of fun masking techniques. Gina's done many on her YouTube channel. I encourage you to watch them. I'm starting by placing a few of the 1/2 inch strips. I'm using my grid lines on my glass work surface to make sure I get them straight. When I placed my first strip down, I made sure the top of the strip is lined up with the bottom of the manger. That way I'm only going to ink above that strip. The rest of these strips I'm placing down are all 1/2 inch strips, and I'm putting them right up against each other. If you don't have Masking Magic strips, you could always just cut your own strips from full Masking Magic sheets, but I do find these strips to be very handy. So once I've covered the top half of the card with these 1/2 inch strips, I realized I should cover the bottom of the card too. I don't want any ink there. That piece of Masking Magic that I placed down is one that I keep in my cabinet, and I use it on the back of my note cards when I'm getting inky, so the back of the card doesn't get inky, and I reuse it over and over again. All right, so I'm starting by removing the second strip, and the third strip, and the fourth strip. So I remove 3 strips here, and this will give me a wide gap where I can apply some ink. So for this card, I'm changing things up. Instead of doing the entire sky here, a blended look, I'm doing stripes of blending. It just creates for a fun interest on the background. In fact, I have done a video where I show how to get really creative with masked blended strips, and I will link that up here on the top right if you want to check it out. It's a really fun technique, a little step up from what I'm doing here. Over this, I applied 3 colors, making sure to overlap for a nice blend. You could do 2 if you wanted to. I then heat set that area because I'll take those 3 masking strips and put them back on this inked area, and they wouldn't really want to stick on wet ink, so by drying it a bit, it'll stay in place. Once those are in place, I will remove the next 2 masking strips, so this area will not be as tall. I thought it'd be fun if I changed each of the areas. So on this one, I'm starting with a bit of that coral reef, which is such a beautiful color. It's a fun color, I think, for fall, by the way. It's like a brighter color you can add into your fall color combos, but I also like blending it with pink and purple. So I'm going over that with a little bit of Passionate Pink and then some Plum Punch along that top edge. Now, again, you could do lots of different things here. You could stamp over this before you move on. You could do some splatter over it if you wanted to. You could spray a mist, but I'm just sticking with the ink. Once I've heat set that, I could put those 2 masking strips back in place and remove the next one. This will be a narrow area, but I'm kind of following this pattern of going to smaller strips towards the top. Over this, I'm using Plum Punch, and then I will come in with a smaller blending brush and apply a bit of dark lilac. This will just be along the top edge of that opening. This is a Gina K Designs detail blending brush. I just bought a bunch of them, and I am really happy with the results. I like that the bristles are flat, and they're great for getting into those tight areas. After I complete that, I'll heat set that ink a bit and put that strip back down and remove the final strip and add dark lilac and a bit of In the Navy over that opening. By the way, Masking Magic, as I mentioned, can be reused. It is very durable, so you can use it several times. So all of these strips I will put onto my Masking Magic strip packaging so that I can reuse them. I'm not reusing them in the video because I wanted it to be clear what inks I'm using, but in regular crafting, I definitely reuse each of these pieces. That's one of the things I really like about Masking Magic. I also like that when you stamp on it, the ink doesn't bleed through. Now this will smooth out thanks to the softening agents in the Gina K Design ink, and you'll get smooth results. That's one of the things I really like about her inks. Now I'm stamping everything on to that background with black ink except for the star. I'm leaving the star for now because I want to do a little bit of inking behind it before I stamp it. So I wanted that star to kind of glow. And one of the best ways to kind of look like something is glowing is to add a bit of white pigment ink on a dark background. You could also use silver pigment ink here. You could also use some perfect pearl, but I'm just going with white ink. I'm first stamping the star with the light whisper ink so I know where it is. Then I'm coming in with my Gina K Designs white pigment ink and a Tim Holtz ink blending tool. And I'm just putting a light kind of area of white. And I'm dabbing my foam inking tool so it smooths out. Now I just want to check and make sure that area is big enough. So I just put it back in there to see, and I decided I wanted it to be a bit bigger. And then I can stamp on top of that with my black ink. First, I will heat set this because I don't want that white ink to smear. Then we'll stamp the star with black. So now it looks like that star is glowing. I love white pigment ink and all the things you can do with it. Again, I'll heat set that. I don't want to smear any of these inks at this point. For a final touch, I am using my extra fine white paint marker to add little dots in the background to look like stars. Now you could definitely do splatter or spatter here, but I really wanted a more controlled look just to give a little bit of interest. Now you could skip this if you wanted to, but I thought it would be fun. I also added some little dots with the gold gel pen to add even more interest and a bit of shine. You could do one or the other. I just thought it'd be fun to mix it. I then trimmed that background down a little bit and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding black note card. I used the 3 wise men image with black ink and stamped it on a matching envelope. I also stamped matching images on the inside. So on the inside, I put a piece of white cardstock so I could write with a regular pen and I didn't have to write on the black cardstock. So here's a closer look at that blending, and look at how that white ink kind of looks like it glows up there. Now again, you could skip those stars if you wanted to. You could have done some stamping over it. The sky's the limit. And with this card, I show that instead of doing a large blended area, try doing stripes. It adds some fun interest and it's a great way to play with more inks. Okay, my next card is very inspired by Gina. She taught a card in a class a few weeks ago that was similar to this, but I did a few things to change it up. This time I'm using a mask stencil for the masking, but you definitely could die cut masking paper. This is the new Gina K Designs masked oval stencil. You get the outside and the inside piece. I'm not using the inside piece, but it would be handy for many other techniques. I'm placing our mask stencil over a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock. Now there are etched lines that make it really easy to make sure that that oval is centered on that cardstock. Now over this, I'm applying different shades of Gina K Design inks. And again, I put the color down and then I overlap the next color. The more you overlap, the better blend you'll get. Now you'll notice that that grip mat inside of my MISTI holds the cardstock and the mask stencil in place, which is really handy, and you've seen me do that throughout this video. By the way, doing a masking blend like this is a great way to try different color combinations and get to know the different colors you have in your stash. Once I have completed that blend, I can remove the mask stencil. Now the way that I like to clean my stencils is with one quick spray of rubbing alcohol and then a dry cloth. It's definitely the fastest way to clean your stencils. However, the only 2 things I use rubbing alcohol to clean in my craft room are stencils and then also my glass work surface. Never use it on stamps. Now I have that pattern background stamp that I used earlier, and I'm placing this over my oval but offset down a bit. Now I want to stamp this stamp with white pigment ink only on the colored area. So here's a little trick that I did to do that. I'm taking the oval mask stencil and gently laying it over my cardstock. I am not going to press it down onto the grip mat. I'm just gently placing it there. Then I'll close the door on my MISTI, and that pattern stamp will actually grab that mask to remove it, and I'll leave it there. So I'm leaving the oval mask on my stamp. Now I can ink over that oval opening with white pigment ink. Once I have inked up that entire area, I can remove that stencil mask and stamp it onto my card panel, and the white ink will only land on the colored background. Now you could have just stamped the white ink over the white cardstock too, right? But it does show up a bit, and I really only wanted that white ink at the center. I thought that was a fun way to add a little bit of interest to that mask color blended area. Next, I will heat set this with my heat gun. I want to make sure that white pigment ink is dry before we stamp on top of it with black ink. Now, the images I'm stamping on this are from the new Gina K Designs Beautiful Day stamp set. There is a coordinating die set available. I think this is such a beautiful set. I really like the sentiments and the silhouette images included. I will be using this a couple more times in this video. It is beautiful. I chose one of those silhouette images, and I'm lining it up so the bottom of that stamp is lined up with the change in the pattern that I stamped with the white pigment ink. I also added a little dragonfly from the same stamp set. I stamped that with black ink, and then I chose a sentiment from this older stamp set from Gina K Designs. It's the You Give Me Butterfly stamp set. I placed that right underneath our floral image, and I'll stamp this with black ink also. Now I finished the rest of this card off screen. It was very easy to do. I used the Master Layouts 2 die set from Gina K Designs to cut that white panel. See how it has that nice faux stitching around the outside edge? I then matted that with black cardstock and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding green note card. I used the same faux stitching die to cut from white cardstock and matted with black to put on the inside of the card. So the front of the card and the inside of the card match nicely. And of course, I stamped the silhouette flower on the envelope flap. All right, next card. This one is a 1-layer card, and we use simple masking to make a card with a lot of bold impact. I also show a way to add a little bit of interest to a layered stenciled background. So I have a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and the Gina K Designs Dogwood stamp set. This is an older set, and I really like the sentiments in it. I chose the Your Friendship is Such a Treasure, and I want it to be along a white masked area that is diagonal at the top of the card. So I'm cutting a strip of Masking Magic to be a little bit taller or wider than my stamp image. Then I will place this along the top of my white panel. Now this is a white cardstock panel right now. You could have done this directly onto a note card, but I wasn't sure that was the way I was headed at the time. So I'll just glue this onto a note card of the same size later on. I will use Sea Glass ink, which is a very light ink, to apply a light coverage over this entire panel. This will help to define the edges of that masking paper when we remove it. So I'm going with a very, very light hand of a very, very light ink so that I can add other colors on top of it. Once I've done that color, we can use our stencils. This is the Gina K Designs Winter Rose Stencil Set. It is beautiful and super easy to use. I'm taking just the solid leaf and the solid flower image, holding it together so I can kind of see through it and decide where I want to place my first flower. I decided to place the center of the flower right where my sentiment will be stamped later on. I will then lay that down onto a sticky mat, remove the floral stencil, and we can now ink the leaves. I wanted the center of that flower to be where my sentiment is so that it draws your eye in. Now, over this, we're applying ink. This is Jelly Bean Green ink. I'm doing just a really quick, light application here. I then can come in with the slightly darker, fresh asparagus and a smaller blending brush, the detail brush from Gina K Designs, and put that ink just at the base of those leaves. You could skip this, but it adds a bit of a shading or dimensional look when you're done. Now remember, throughout all of this, I'm keeping that masking strip that's diagonal there across the top. That way when I remove it, that area will be solid white. I now can take the first layer of the flower. So there are 2 flower stencils, 2 leaf stencils. I'll come finish the leaf later on. Over this, I'm applying Turquoise Sea. This is slightly darker than that sea glass that we applied on the background, and I'm doing a medium application. Then I'll remove this and add our second flower stencil. This one layers up with the first one. Over this, I will apply Tranquil Teal, and I'm doing a medium application of that. Once I've completed it, I'll come in with a smaller Gina K detail brush and add a bit of blue denim. This blue denim is only in the little nooks and crannies, so only along the edges of these openings, just to give that shading and dimensional look. After I did that, I thought I'd go back to the first flower stencil and add a little bit of shading on the nooks of this using the Tranquil Teal. Now these details you definitely could skip, but I find they give even better results. So if you want to step up your layering stencil game, try doing that. All right, so we have our first flower done. Let's add the details to the leaves. Over this, I will apply fresh asparagus ink and then a touch of blue denim on the inside tips. Now that blue denim on top of the green just gets a little bit darker, and that way I didn't have to go out and dig an even darker green ink out. Once I've finished this flower and leaves, I want to add another one to the bottom corner, but I want it to look a little bit different. So this time I'm taking the stencils and flipping them over. I'm using them upside down. This will give me a mirror image. You really don't have to only use the front of your stencils. You could use either side, and it just gives a slightly different look. So I will follow the same process. I'll start with the leaves, making sure the leaves don't overlap with what I've already done, just trying to make them kind of fit together. And I will follow the same process, same colors, same inking to create the entire rows and leaves. I skipped through the middle parts there because it's exactly like the first one I did. Now for the third rows, I'm not going to use the leaf stencils at all. I'm only using the 2 rose stencils so that it'll fit there nicely in that bottom corner. So don't be afraid to skip some of your layering stencils to get, again, a new look. After completing that rose, I did add a few leaves to the top right corner and the top left corner to fill out the entire background. Once that's done, I can remove that masking strip and then stamp my sentiment in the opening. However, I decided to do one more thing to that background, so I put the masking paper back on top so we can add some additional inking. I'm using the Gina K Designs Gauze background stamp, and I'll stamp this over the entire background with white pigment ink. By the way, my lighting got a little weird here. And the reason is Lila fell asleep on my craft room floor, so I turned all the lights out except for those directly over my work surface. So I apologize. It'll go back to normal here in a moment. Now, the reason I'm stamping with the gauze stamp with white pigment ink over this background is it gives like this faux linen or faux fabric feel to it. You could totally skip this, but the detail in real life is gorgeous. I did a whole video on this technique, and I'll link to that video up here in the top right. All right, so there you can see that little texture, and it just steps up that background. If you wanted the gauze print to be darker, you could use, say, the turquoise sea ink, which is a medium color, and stamp that over the entire background. But I really like the look of that white. Just be sure to heat set it when you're done. Now I can stamp the sentiment into that masked area, and this is a true 1-layer panel. I glued that onto a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, the same size as the panel we created. I also stamped a matching sentiment on the envelope and on the inside of the card. I did also use my white paint pen to add little dots to the background to fill in some of the empty area, so it adds a little bit of interest, but it doesn't add any bulk. So with this technique, we used masking to create a spot for our sentiment and then do a full inked background. Now this next card I think is my favorite of the bunch because it's very simple, but you have a unique masked inked background. And this is something you can do with a lot of different stamp images on top. I'm once again using that beautiful Gina K Designs Beautiful Day stamp set. The floral image that I'm using on this card is actually 2 stamps, so you could do the stems and the flowers in different colors, but I'll use black for both. I have a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'm placing a 1/2 inch masking magic strip along one edge, and then I will do 2 1/2 inch masking magic strips on the bottom edge. Now you could do this however you want. I'm doing a random kind of plaid in this corner, but you could really do any kind of lattice. Gina has done videos where she does like a diamond lattice over the entire background, and that's what's inspired this one. I left a little gap after those 1/2 inch strips and then added the narrow Masking Magic strips. Then I left about a 1/4 inch gap and added 1/4 inch masking strips. Then I left about a 1/2 inch gap and added 1/2 inch masking strips. Again, completely random. I just wanted to create kind of a plaid there, kind of focused in the bottom right corner of this card. Now over this, I'm adding dark orchid ink towards that corner, and then I'm going lighter as I work my way up to the top left corner of the card. Then I added medium orchid and then light orchid, and I just allowed that to kind of fade out. So it's heaviest in the bottom right corner and it gets to white in the top left corner. Once I've added all that ink, I can remove those strips. Now I'm going to reuse a couple of these. The rest I will save for another project. It looks great as is, but I wanted to add more to it. So I'm putting a few of those strips into the white gaps so that we can add more ink and kind of build that plaid look. Again, kind of random here, but there are many ways you can do this. Then I will put those 1/2 inch strips along the bottom and the side just so those stay masked off. Sorry my head gets in the way, but sometimes looking directly over the project is the best way to line things up. Now this time I'm only adding a light amount of the light orchid ink. I want this to be subtle. Then I can remove those strips, save them for another project, and we have this fun corner plaid design. And on top of this, I just add simple stamping. I'll first stamp the stems of this floral image with black ink, and then I'll stamp the flowers themselves with black ink. So I really like that Gina split up this design, so you could do 2 colors if you wanted to. You could do maybe silver and gold for this card design, but I'm doing black for both. At this point, I didn't want to mess up by having a crooked sentiment, so I'm taking my Simon Says Stamp placement guide that has the grid and place it over my card. I then can use those grid lines to make sure that my sentiment is straight, and I can also do a practice stamping of that sentiment before I remove that placement guide. By stamping on that clear piece first, I can look through it and make sure it's positioned just right. Then I can remove it and stamp it onto my card panel. And I can easily wipe that ink off my placement guide using a baby wipe. If you don't have a placement guide like this, you could just use any clear piece of acetate. All right, now I did trim that background down and added it to a black note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I added a white cardstock piece to the inside that's the same size, and I stamped another sentiment and a bird from the same stamp set. Now you could add sequins or gems to this, but I thought I'd keep it simple and keep the focus on that fun masked plaid. Now my last card, I have a trick for using outline images that you don't want to take the time to color, and another trick on how to make simple cards like this a little more special. So this is the beautiful Gina K Designs Joyful Season stamp set. Man, that image is beautiful. I like how large it is. There are many ways you could put that onto a card and get different looks. I also have a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now off screen, I placed some strips along the edge. I have a 1/2 inch strip right along the left edge of that cardstock, a little gap, and then a narrow Gina K masking strip. That's all I have on there. The rest of it is just the white cardstock. Now I will cut some pieces of regular Masking Magic. The bottom one's about 1 1/4 inches and the top one's like 2 3/4 inches. I'll place this over our background. So what we end up having exposed is that long white gap with those 2 masking strips along the left edge. Now these pieces again can be reused, so don't be discouraged if you use them for one card. You can use them for more. I'm just using fresh masking pieces each time so that you can better see what I'm doing. Now over this area, I'm applying Coral Reef kind of towards the left, and I'm going a little heavier there. And then I will move on to lighter colors and let that fade out towards the right. If you wanted to, you could have this fade to white, but I'm just having it fade to light. I really like the coral colors that Gina K Designs has. The coral reef and the carnation colors go really well together. After doing this, I decided I wanted darker red over to the left, so I'm coming in with cherry red and adding that on. Don't be afraid to go high contrast. These inks will kind of pull back a bit and soften, so it is good to have a bit more contrast than you want in the end. So now I can remove all that masking paper, save it for another project, and we have a fun mask background. Now after doing this, I decided I wanted a little more red ink over on that left-hand side. So I'm putting some masking paper and strips back onto that just so I can add a little bit of red along that left edge. Don't be afraid to change your mind. Don't be afraid to layer up things. Whatever you want to get that masked background and make it a little more interesting than just a plain strip across. Over that little area there on the left, I'll add cherry red ink, and now we have an interesting background. Now I also will be using a sentiment stamp set. This is actually the free gift right now at the time this video goes up over at Gina K Designs. If you spend $75, not only do you get free US shipping, but you get this stamp set for free. And there are dies available to coordinate with it that you can purchase if you're interested. Later on, this stamp set should be available for purchase also. Now, I will take that large floral image that I showed you earlier and put it along the left edge. And I will take the Hello Friend from the stamp set I just showed you and figure out where I want the placement to be. By positioning them both at the same time, I can make sure that they will each fit nicely on the front of the card. I first stamped just the floral image because I wasn't sure about that sentiment. I wasn't sure if I wanted to trade it out or pop it up, but I did decide in the end to just stamp that with black also and just have it kind of tucked into that floral image. All right, now once I've stamped this, I wanted to add something interesting to it. I really like that masking and how that adds interest, but I wanted something else special to this. So I will take this outside and spray it with silver glitter dust. I love this stuff. It doesn't rub off. I just give it a quick spritz outside and it adds silver sparkle over the whole panel. You can see it's just a sparkly dust and it's gorgeous. It's available in gold too. And that is another way to really step up a simple one layer panel like this. I glued that panel onto a note card of the same size, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I stamped the floral image along the bottom inside so it matches with the outside. And I'm also stamping Miss You with the coral reef ink. So this ties the front and the inside together nicely. Now, this is the completed card. I added a silver metallic envelope to go with it. The nice thing about that glitter dust spray is it's very fine glitter, very, very fine, and it doesn't rub off and it doesn't block whatever's behind it. So it adds a lot of fun to a simple card like this. Now this shows you that you don't have to color those large images. Instead, combine it with a masked background. Now before we go, I did want to mention something else that's in this Gina K Design release. In my hand there is the Gina K All at Once Greeting Die, which she came out with a few months ago. And she keeps coming out with stamp sets that coordinate with that die. So like this one on the right here, the holiday season stamp, you stamp that large image, which is all those sentiments, and then you use that die to cut them all out at once. I love that she keeps adding different sentiments that work with the same die. And I wanted to mention that this one's now available because I've used this die in past videos. All right, there you have it. Some masking tricks and techniques, all inspired by Gina K. I encourage you to check out her YouTube channel and watch her live. She goes live every Tuesday and Thursday. If you're interested in the supplies that I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I'll link to those related videos that I mentioned during this one. Thanks so much for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon.